The tribe has spoken. The other day I put out a poll asking you what you wanted to see on my channel next, and so many of my amazing subscribers replied back and let me know exactly what that is. And it seems like a lot of y'all want to see what do I put on my mix bus. Well, in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly that. I'm going to show you what's on my mix bus for the song Rent Free by EverythingOShauN. Are you ready? Let's go.
5.
This is me, 5-Piece, your boy, producer and engineer extraordinaire. You may not recognize me today. I'm wearing a little bit of a disguise, but don't y'all worry. I'm still going to come kick some facts and drop some game on y'all, as I always do. And in today's video, like I said, we're going to talk about what's on my mix bus. I'm going to show you what's on my mix bus for Rent Free by EverythingOShauN. This is a new track that we just dropped. I'm going to leave a link to that in the description below. But let's get right into this and talk about what's on my mix bus and break it down step by step. So to be fair, my mix bus is usually fairly simple. It's really these 3 plugins that you see here. And I'm going to break down exactly what this is, what I'm doing, how I'm thinking about it when I set this up. But the first thing I want to do is just give you a place to compare from. So what I'm going to do is I'll play this right now, this track, without any of the mastering, of course, and without anything that's on my mix bus. And I'll just put these items in. So let's check that out first. Here we go.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free.
Okay, so hopefully you can hear the difference there. It's not a huge difference. This is just my mix bus, and I don't like to do a lot of heavy lifting here. I'm really just trying to enhance things a bit. And as you can tell, like, we're getting a little bit more volume, a little bit more consistency, a little bit more presence out of this track with these 3 plugins. So just to really up the ante a little bit, I'm going to now put in my mastering chain, and I'm going to, put these in and take them out. I'm going to show you what they sound like without these 3 plugins again, but going into the mastering, and you can see how this will really impact what the master sounds like, or at least a little bit more than you think. So let's check this out again. Same thing, A and B without my mix bus. Here we go.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free. Rent free.
So you can hear that when I put these 3 plugins that I have on my mix bus in, we're getting just a little bit more out of everything. A little bit more vocal, a little bit more presence from the vocal, a little bit more bass and impact from the low end, a little bit more, consistency again, like I said. And I just wanted to show you what it sounds like with and without the mastering, because in case anybody didn't know, what I'm talking about here is what's on my mix bus. This is the stuff that's at the very end of my mixing chain, but the stuff that's before my mastering chain, okay? And a lot of us that are mixing, we're going to be setting up our mix bus and maybe sending our track out to somebody else to master. That's perfectly acceptable. In my case, particularly, I actually like to master a lot of my own tracks. I actually mix into my mastering chain very often. This is actually a more common practice as time goes on with a lot of engineers. You'll see this more and more. I like to do what's called the top-down method, where I'll really focus on my masters and my sub-masters or subgroups, and then kind of get into my individual tracks. Of course, sometimes I'm able to automate this a little bit with a template, but these are things that I naturally do, and everyone's going to be a little bit different in their approach, but this is mine, and this is my specific approach for this song. So let's actually get into what's on this mix bus, starting with the first plugin. And the first plugin is Parallel Compression. Now, I'm actually using Cytomic's The Glue, And I have a pretty aggressive setup here in some ways, not fully, but in some ways. And that is that I have a 4-to-1 ratio. I have a pretty slow attack, so my attack and release are actually set very transparently because the release is quick as well. But then I'm really driving the threshold down and I'm adding a lot of makeup gain back to the track. But the thing is, what I'm ultimately doing is I'm actually mixing this in. So I only have 10% of this signal that I have coming in here. I only have 10% of that being blended with the original track. So ultimately what this is doing, just so you guys fully understand, is it's really going to be increasing the sustain of the track, of the elements in the mix, of course, and bringing them up. And that's going to increase the consistency and loudness overall, and especially on smaller listening devices. But at the same time, I have my attack and release set up in a way where it's still relatively transparent. So that way, my transients are not getting squashed and there's still some definition. Remember, there's only 10% of this signal that's actually going to be heard, but this 10% makes a big difference. And before I continue, I do want to mention that I do have a high pass on here. So that way only 405 hertz and above is what's being compressed. So we're not really compressing any of the low end elements, any of the sub or the bass or kick or any of that stuff. It's really just focused on the higher end elements, the vocals, the mid, stuff like that, and driving it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bypass my entire mastering chain once again, and I'll bypass everything and just put the glue in and out, and you can hear what kind of difference it's making. So check this out.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah.
You kind of get the idea, right? And you can see that I'm losing upwards of about 4 dB. So this is actually set a little bit more aggressively than I would like. Typically, I would match the makeup gain to whatever I'm losing. In this case, I really cranked it, you know what I mean, and increased the overall gain. In fact, I think I actually used a preset here, the drum full parallel high pass preset, and just adjusted things a little bit to taste. However, I'm not really mad at what's happening here. I do sometimes do things differently. Sometimes I will actually get upwards of 10 dB of gain reduction and obviously adjust my makeup gain to match whatever I'm losing. And then even sometimes drive the attack so that it's quicker and the release so that it's slower, so that I'm really getting a little bit more of that grab on the initial transient or the attack, and then really drive up the sustain so that the track is sort of, lingering a little bit longer, so to speak. It doesn't really sound like lingering. It just is increasing the consistency of it. But I actually prefer that sound a lot of times. But again, remember, we're only driving up about 10% of the signal that we've created here. So we're not completely compressing and losing everything here. We're just mixing in this hyper compressed version, so to speak, with the original dry track. Before I continue breaking down this mix bus, I wanted to say, if you're getting value out of this video, if you're learning something, please smash that like button. That would really mean a lot to me, and it would help other people like yourself discover this content, and it'll also tell the YouTube algorithm to show you more of my helpful videos. I drop a new piece of content every single week, always focused on helping you sound better and helping you make more money with your music. So I definitely advise you to do that if you want to see more of my videos. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing to the channel. It would really mean a lot. And again, I'm really trying to help you here with my free content that I really paid money to learn. I spent a lot of time learning and doing all these things. I'm really getting right to it and giving you the goods for free 99. All I ask of you is to pay the small fee, which is subscribe to the channel, and like the video if you like what you're seeing so far. Now with that in mind, let's get back to this mix bus and talk about the next thing I put on it. So the next thing in the chain is a tape emulation, and I'm specifically using Isotope's vintage tape plugin here. This comes with Isotope Ozone 9, and I like to use this a lot, and I almost use it in a way like an EQ. I'm trying to get certain things out of this that'll really just help the track. It'll usually warm it up, it'll saturate it a little bit, it'll help increase the presence of the low end and the high end and just smooth any harshness sometimes. There's obviously ways that we're going to set this up, but what I have done in this particular case is I have my speed set to 30 IPS. And, this is the specific frequency response I liked. I feel like it just sort of enhanced the high end more so than the others, because I know 7.5 and 15 might affect the low end a little bit more. I really wanted the high end to be smooth and present, so that's what I've decided to do in this case. I've actually driven the input, so I'm adding 3 dB of volume here, but you'll notice that I'm still not clipping whenever I put this in, right? But I'm just, again, increasing the overall presence of everything and driving the signal into this plugin specifically to get the response that I want. Now, on the bias side of things, I went a little bit more on the positive side. I do find that I kind of go to the negative side sometimes, but I like the characteristic of this particular curve here. I always just advise people to play with this, whether you know what these things do or not. I'll go fully up one way, fully down the other way, hear which side I prefer more, and then kind of pull back and compensate and not go the full extreme of it, and just find a middle ground between where I like and, where it's neutral, right? And that's what I decided to do here. I am adding a slight amount of harmonics, 0.5, so not a lot, but just enough so that the saturation is adding a little bit more frequency, harmonic content, for example, to, again, make this thing cut more. And I don't always do this, but I have increased the low and the high end emphasis uniquely, of course, by 2 and 2.5 respectively, to again almost add this EQ type of element to it where I'm able to increase and enhance the low end content, the bass, the kick, the sub, but then also increase the high end content, which will affect more of the stuff like the vocals, the snares, the hi-hats, the cymbals, and just things that live in that particular range. So keeping in line with the previous example, let me actually bypass this and put it in, and let's hear the difference that this vintage tape is specifically making.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind, rent free, rent free. Living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind, rent free.
Hopefully you could hear the difference. Again, it's a little bit more subtle since I don't have the mastering engaged in this particular case. But when I have this in, you should be able to hear that the vocals just feel a little bit warmer, a little bit more full. The overall track just feels more full, and I guarantee that's because of this low-end emphasis that we've added here, among other things. And really, I'm liking what it's doing here, and I'm trying to, again, to not really go too crazy here, although I do feel like adding 3 dB on the input is a little bit crazy. Anything more than 1 dB could sometimes be perceived as a lot. But overall, I don't feel like this is a super crazy drastic move. I like what it's doing. And that's ultimately what I decided to do on this track on the mix bus. So there's still one other plugin that I added here, and that plugin is a FabFilter Pro MB. And I'm actually specifically using this to grab between 850 hertz and 10,000 hertz. Now, to be fully fair and transparent, this is not something that I commonly do. I only do this in select situations, whereas the previous two plugins are almost always on every single mix bus that I'm working on. However, in this particular case, I'm using this to just control this extremely, present, sometimes nasally, sometimes harsh type of area, depending on the vocalist. It's usually more harsh than anything, but I'm using this to just control that area, and a lot of times it's due to the vocals, the snares, and the hi-hats, sometimes a combination of all three, as well as cymbals and stuff like that. Any kind of metallic percussion, really. But we're using it to just control this area, and it's really not as aggressive as you think. I'm losing upwards of 1 dB on the range here, so 1 dB is the max reduction I'm going to get here. I've set up my threshold so that I can actually achieve that amount of a reduction when needed, and I've actually left my attack, release, and ratio at their pretty much default states with a 4:1 and a pretty fast attack and release. That's just what I felt to be good here, but let me just show you what's going on. So I'll bypass this and then put it in. Here we go.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, rent free. Living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind rent free. Yeah, rent free. Living in your mind rent free. Yeah, rent free. Living in your mind rent free.
So again, very subtle, very hard to notice almost in a way, but just wanted to control this area. And typically I'll do this to especially control it for smaller listening devices. You may not even hear a problem necessarily on big speakers, but on little devices that have a more limited range in terms of their frequency reproduction, I find that this area can be very overwhelming sometimes depending on the track and depending on how you've mixed it. So just to be fully clear, let me actually isolate these frequencies and just show you exactly what we're reducing here.
Rent free. Living in your mind rent free. Yeah, rent free.
So you can hear a few elements here, but really it's mainly the vocal, the snare, little bit of that guitar-like string, little bit of the hi-hats and stuff like that, but primarily it's the vocal and the snare and the combination of the two that just become a little bit overwhelming. And again, we're just getting a 1 dB reduction, nothing too crazy, just something nice and minimal, but enough to control it and allow it to work on these different playback devices that I'm talking about. So you asked, I delivered, I showed you the mix bus for this particular track, and I appreciate y'all for watching. I hope you got value out of this. If you did, please smash that like button once again if you haven't done so already. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing to the channel. I drop a new piece of content every single week, always focused on helping you sound better and helping you make more money with your music. I appreciate y'all for watching. Please leave me a comment down below if you liked what you saw or if you want to see something in a future video, and I'll check you again then. All right, y'all take care now. Peace.
5.